If the domestic economy collapses far enough, the pressure eventually forces a move toward the ultimate deterrent, the threat to close the Strait of Hormuz. But this geopolitical mechanical trap is built in a way that exposes Iran's most critical assets. To see the flaw, we have to look past the Chokepoint and into the Gulf. Here sits Karg Island. It handles over 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, acting as the central vault for the nation's wealth. This vault is a concentrated, static offshore target. Its deep-water loading berths and storage tanks are anchored in open water, unable to move or hide. Any attempt to arm the trap at Hormuz instantly turns Karg Island into a primary target for military interdiction. Iran's asymmetric strategy relies on saturating these narrow channels with contact sea mines and coastal defense cruise missiles. These fast-attack swarming tactics are effective at harassing slow-moving commercial tankers. However, they cannot protect the oil hoard against a modern, conventional navy. Deploying these assets against global shipping triggers a massive, conventional response from the United States and its international partners. Western military doctrine prioritizes the suppression of enemy air defenses. Precision strikes are used to systematically dismantle the coastal radar networks required to guide Iran's missiles. Within days of an active blockade, the defensive network along the southern coastline would be largely decapitated. The asymmetric trap doesn't stop the breach. It provides justification for the rapid destruction of Iran's maritime military infrastructure and its primary export terminals. We need to track where that oil is actually going to see who a blockade truly hurts. The strategic assumption behind closing the vault is that it would starve Western powers, triggering a crippling energy crisis in Europe and the United States. In reality, the West is relatively resilient to this specific threat. The U.S. is a net energy exporter, while Europe relies on diversified Atlantic supplies and deep strategic petroleum reserves. The trap misses its intended targets. These nations have spent decades insulating themselves from the Gulf's vulnerabilities. Most oil leaving the Gulf flows east, toward the industrial centers of Asia. China is the world's largest crude importer. It relies on a steady flow of millions of barrels daily from the Persian Gulf, and is the primary buyer of Iran's sanctioned crude. This creates the Beijing dilemma. By shutting down the strait, Iran inflicts direct economic harm on the very nation that serves as its economic lifeline. This move poisons Iran's relationship with its most important diplomatic protector, risking the loss of crucial leverage within the United Nations Security Council. Major Asian importers and neighboring Gulf states would be forced to align with international efforts to break the blockade and restore their own energy security. Transforming into a disruptor of the global supply chain leaves Tehran diplomatically isolated, as even its partners prioritize their own economic stability over the survival of the Iranian regime. Moving past the immediate military conflict reveals a long-term structural aftermath. Whenever a critical choke point becomes too unstable, global energy markets reconfigure to bypass that risk. This instability pushes regional competitors to accelerate the construction of alternative transit routes that do not rely on the strait. These pipelines and storage facilities lead to deep-water ports on the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. By the time traffic in the Gulf returns to normal, the physical map of global oil transit has shifted, making the old choke point less relevant to the global economy. Global refineries will also adjust, recalibrating their mechanical configurations to process crude from more stable suppliers like Brazil or Guyana. Buyers who once took risks to buy discounted Iranian oil will instead lock into long-term contracts with suppliers who can guarantee stability. The Strait of Hormuz is the fragile artery through which Iran's own economic survival flows. A blockade zeroes out Iran's foreign income, while its competitors continue to reach the market through their new bypass pipelines. Disrupting the vault creates a temporary shock for the world, but for the nation that triggers it, the loss of market position is a wound that may never fully heal. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Measuring just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, its international shipping lanes are restricted to a 2-mile corridor. Daily, 20 to 30% of the world's petroleum and liquefied natural gas passes through this single bottleneck. For decades, Iran's strategic doctrine has relied on the capability to choke off this flow. By threatening the use of fast attack craft, naval mines, and anti-ship missiles, Tehran aims to hold the global economy hostage. The intended effect is straightforward. A total shutdown would send oil prices toward $200 a barrel overnight, sparking hyperinflation and political panic across the West. This threat of economic ruin has historically served as a powerful deterrent, designed to force Western powers to retreat from direct military or economic confrontation. However, recent confrontations suggest that the leverage provided by the strait is no longer as one-sided as it appears. In a modern high-stakes crisis, executing this blockade triggers what analysts call a boomerang effect, where the damage intended for the West rebounds directly onto the sender. The structural vulnerabilities of the Iranian economy mean that a closed strait functions less like a shield against foreign intervention and more like a mechanism for self-imposed economic isolation. To see how this plays out, imagine the blockade begins. Iran deploys anti-ship missiles and naval mines to halt commercial traffic through the Chokepoint. This is a look at the massive physical infrastructure rivals have spent decades building specifically to render the Hormuz threat obsolete. Rival Gulf nations immediately activate alternative export routes. This map shows them rerouting crude oil overland, bypassing the strait entirely. Specifically, Saudi Arabia's pipeline moves over 5 million barrels daily to the Red Sea, while the UAE's transports oil directly to the Gulf of Oman. Iran, however, is geographically trapped. Its primary export terminals are deep inside the Persian Gulf, meaning their tankers must pass through their own blockade. At Karg Island, shown here, This is critical because Iran relies on bulk imports for agricultural staples like corn and livestock feed, arriving at northern ports like Bandar Imam Khomeini. By making the waters too dangerous for neutral shipping, the state unintentionally severs its own domestic food pipeline, leading to shortages within weeks. These factors combine to create a domestic crisis. The total loss of oil revenue means the inflow of foreign hard currency stops immediately. As the supply of essential food drops and the demand for imports remains high, the local economy enters an inflationary feedback loop. The physical currency, the rial, bears the brunt of this shock, losing its remaining value as the state struggles to fund basic subsidies. This economic chain reaction transforms a military threat into an internal security crisis, forcing the state to manage domestic collapse while simultaneously engaging foreign powers. In the aftermath of a closure, global powers will use strategic petroleum reserves and bypass pipelines to absorb the temporary price shock and stabilize their economies. Iran possesses no such buffers. It has no bypass pipelines of sufficient scale and an economy that is fully exposed to the immediate disruption of its imports and exports. Ultimately, the Strait of Hormuz is a double-edged weapon. In modern warfare, a blockade isn't a shield for Iran, it is a self-destruct button.